It's Friday, August 30th. Let's talk PlayStation. So first up, you have just a few days left to grab those August PS Plus games, which are Sniper Elite 4 and Wipeout the Omega Collection, because coming September 3rd, we are officially moving on to Batman Arkham Knight and Darksiders 3. So a very solid month. I'm loving this. I'm really liking the direction we're going with PS Plus. Seems like a lot of people are also very pleased with this one. Batman, fantastic game, but also Darksiders 3, I'm seeing a lot of people saying that they were, they held back on buying this game, so it seems like a great time for it to be offered up on Plus and to give people some value out of the service finally. Now, our first news story, really two news stories about some firmware. So first up, PS3 got firmware 4.85, nothing major, system improvement, software stability, what have you. Whatever the wording is that they use nowadays, that's what it is. So hey, this could potentially be the last PS3 firmware update we ever actually see because the system is long out of production. Same with PlayStation Vita, it got a new firmware update as well, 3.72. It was speculated early on that this might have been closing a new exploit that was released for 3.71, but apparently that's not the case. 3.72 still works with this latest homebrew on PlayStation Vita, so not really sure what's going on there. But at the very least, this also could be a scenario where this may be the last PS Vita firmware update that we really have. But I'd venture that there's maybe 3-4 more that we could potentially see if Sony does want to close up those exploits and whatever ones that come out well after that. There's still going to be a bit of crossover where Sony wants to keep homebrew and piracy off Vita just a little bit, given that it still has an active PlayStation Store, so it wants to see genuine sales from the device, even though it's long been considered a legacy platform that probably doesn't generate that much cash flow. But at the very least, I could see where Sony's coming from if they do want to keep closing up the exploits in homebrew. Now moving on, we got an update on those PS5 Dev Kit images from last week. Now, mind you, they were images that were very much stenciled outlines. It was the patent imagery, and that's pretty much it. We talked about how it's a dev kit, and yes, that's what it looks like because the developer confirmed that that's what they look like, but rather, it's not what we're going to see in consumer hardware. It just looks a little bit odd and overly designed. Well, Let's Go Digital, the site posted some images of actually coloring it in and giving us kind of an idea of what it potentially looks like. And mind you, I don't necessarily care for the renderings because it's way too dressed up. I mean, wholeheartedly, the way this thing actually looks like in real life is more than likely droll, black, flat plastic, matte plastic, mind you. Not glossy, not reflective. There's definitely no LED ambient lighting going through the grills of it. I'd also imagine there's no PS5 imagery on there whatsoever. If anything, you're getting just a simple PlayStation symbol and that's it. Again, you might have one little small green LED indicating that it's on or off, but that's it, right? The box itself is going to be pretty bland, and that's development hardware. So the mock-up looks cool, but it's not really accurate, I would imagine, and also it's kind of annoying that it was circulated around so much because now you're seeing so many people think that's what PlayStation 5 looks like, which, it's not what it's going to look like, but people will find out the hard way if they actually believe that's what it's going to look like. Anyway, Marvel's SpiderMan got a Stealth Game of the Year edition released this past week, so it came out at a budget price of $40, available right now. Comes with all the DLC, so a pretty good buy for sure. I'm seeing the base game still sell for like $35, $40. I'm sure that'll level out where that version will go down in price, and obviously that's not going to be in manufacturing and disc printing anymore, so that's going to exhaust out their copies, and this Game of the Year edition will be available everywhere. So a very good deal, though. If you have not bought the game just yet, this is a great way to get into it. Now, getting into Gamescom 2019, the awards were dished out, and Sony did take home a few victories, but most notably, the best of show for Gamescom 2019 went to Dreams on PS4, the current early access that's available right now. And remember, at Gamescom, you've got Borderlands 3, you've got Final Fantasy 7 Remake, you've got the Avengers, you got Need for Speed Heat, you got Nintendo bringing Pokemon there, the Zelda remake. I mean, impressive for sure that Dreams actually took it home. It was noted that Dreams had won for its impressive toolkit and what people can do in the game and what they can create. And it very much is a sandbox for creators. We're seeing more and more complex creations come out of the service. Well, it's funny that I naturally wanted to call it service when it's still considered its own title and its own game. But you can sort of see this long-term goal of Media Molecule low-key exploring monetization and letting these games get possibly published outside of Dreams. You can see there's a lot of potential there. But it's one of those things where, Dreams is getting a lot of this recognition, but at the same time, there's just no buzz for the game. I mean, anytime you see an article about Dreams, there's maybe a few comments, if that. There's not a whole lot of traffic involving the game. It seems like the kind of people that are really interested in it love it, but just the sense of community isn't there just yet. Sony hasn't really been pushing it all that much, and I guess they really shouldn't. They even said that the early access was capped at some point, which it hasn't reached that because it's still on the PlayStation Store, so not really sure what's going on there. But the game, I think there needs to be a little bit more of a widespread reach to it. It's still going to be one of those titles that's not going to be for everybody, but I would hope that some heavy single-player content's being prepared for this full release, and I hope it is a big deal when Sony does plan to give it a full release once Media Molecule, is confident with a heavy foundation of what the game is built upon. It's just one of those things where I can see how this game is not going to be the same as Little Big Planet's 2008 release, which back then it was monumental, it was important, and Little Big Planet did so well in gathering all walks of gamer life into playing that game, but it just seems like Dreams is not going to be able to replicate that under any circumstance, which is really unfortunate. Now, moving on to The Last of Us Part 2, we got some new footage this past week, not for the public, but rather the attendees of the GameStop's Managers Conference, and so from what we're hearing, it was a small vertical slice of gameplay where you're using clickers to your advantage. And I would imagine this looked just like what we saw in the DLC from the first game, which is you inciting the clickers to get mad, or the infected to get mad, and then those will fight the human enemies while you just kind of stand back and let that all play out in front of you. And I would hope that Naughty Dog is going to capitalize on that and make it much more dynamic and much more involved to where you, the player, can encourage that organically throughout a number of different scenarios and circumstances throughout the gameplay of The Last of Us Part 2, so I'm hoping that's what it looks like, but we are hearing that it was really small. However, we're also told that this footage will be released soon, so whether it's really small or if it's a bit of a dynamic piece of gameplay where there's a cutscene interspersed in between, because it's got to be presented in some sort of manner where when it goes out to the public it has to look kind of like a final product, right? Where it's a finished trailer. You can't just show a 30-second clip of gameplay and then just call it a day, especially how we've been seeing the game so far, which is that Sony makes it a very big deal because The Last of Us Part 2 is a big deal. Now remember, we do have a rumor that we are getting a State of Play on November 1st, which will include footage of The Last of Us Part 2 and a release date. Remains to be seen if that's what will happen. There's also PAX West going on right now, I believe. Starting Friday it should be going on. So we could hear something out of there, or this footage come out of there, I don't know. By all means, it could be out by the time I'm talking about this. But as always, we'll keep it posted here on the channel about what's going on. Now, I filed this next one under we still don't know how this happens or why Sony does this, but it's cool. Check your emails. Sony may have sent you a free copy of Astrobot Rescue Mission on PlayStation VR, which is perhaps the most generous thing they've done lately. Again, if you're keeping track here, what Sony's been doing the past 3-4 years now is handing out various free themes, avatars, sometimes discount codes, sometimes PSN credit. We don't know how it happens or who gets it or why people are selected. Seems like it's always spread between multiple regions as well, so there's really no way to find out how this happens, and not many users report it, so it must be a very, very small select amount of people that are lucky enough to just get free things from Sony. But this is definitely the most significant thing they've given away, which is just a full-on game that's quite a recent release. We haven't narrowed it down as to, if it's PSVR owners and not PSVR owners. Both categories are receiving the code. Seems like a lot of people from Australia are getting the code, so I'm not sure if people outside of that have gotten the game, but check your emails. You may be sitting on a free copy of Astrobot Rescue Mission. So always cool that Sony does that, but it would be also cool to hear some criteria so, more people could maybe get free stuff. Moving on to our weekly Death Stranding news, and I can pretty much guarantee at this point we're going to have Death Stranding news every single week until the game comes out, and probably 3-4 months after the game ships as well, because Kojima just loves talking. I mean, you can't blame him though. He's trying to prepare his game to be released, and he wants the game to do well. Well, anyway, this past week he was describing the multiplayer about the game and actually comparing it to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, that movie that we got not too long ago. It's a great film, by the way. But he kind of describes it like that a little bit. And so one user on Reddit actually translated his response, and it says, "It's like Miles Morales in the Spider-Man Spider-Verse. Miles thinks he is the only Spider-Man, then different characters from different alternate dimensions also become Spider-Man and meet up. All of a sudden, Miles is not alone. Of course, Death Stranding will be different, but it's a clue towards what the game is about. Sorry, but I really can't say anymore. Is that okay?" I would imagine this is what he's been saying for a while now. The game's all about connecting people, bringing people together. So I don't know. The way I'm interpreting it, seems like the game's going to start off like it's trying to instill a lot of isolation in you and make it seem as though you're always alone. You're not around anybody, and that is what the footage is that we've seen of the game so far. You're always in this deep, vast landscape where there's nobody around, and I think that's one of the things that maybe Kojima's been holding back about the game. Not necessarily all this chaotic gameplay and all this, combat and whatnot, but rather maybe there's a certain arc in where, it doesn't seem that isolated and the environment changes dramatically to look much more lively, and you have a lot more people around you, not necessarily as in other real-life players, but maybe, ghosted images of what they've been doing. That's just, a theory, right? At this point, though, my theory is going to be just as good as anybody else's. At least we have a little bit of insight as to what the game might look like with its multiplayer component. Another thing you mentioned is about, apparently there's a first-person mode, and that's all he said, really. So we have no elaboration on what that entails, if you can play the whole game like that, if it's just, a certain camera mode that you can look out through, but you can't really do much through that scope. Who knows? Maybe it's a certain section of the game, or maybe you can inherently go through the whole thing as a first-person view. But he stresses that it's not a first-person shooter, so you'd also imagine that the game might not meant to be played that way if it is an option. But either way, that's also some news that we learned about the game. So this next one I found pretty fascinating. This is a quote coming from Microsoft's head of gaming services, Ben Becker. He was speaking to Game Reactor about Xbox Game Pass at Gamescom 2019. He was quoted as saying, we would like to see Game Pass on all platforms ultimately, and I think that is a long-term goal. We don't have any specific plans today, but we would love to see Game Pass really go anywhere. Now this, of course, really kind of indirectly implies PlayStation 4 and PlayStation products, you would assume. When they say all platforms, they want to release everywhere. That includes mobile, PC. You've seen Microsoft dabble a little bit with Nintendo. The thing, so this is, I said it's a fascinating quote, but really it's such a weird, polarizing quote for so many reasons. Not even just the PlayStation aspect of it, but inherently what Game Pass is, which is, it's Xbox games that you pay monthly for. It's 100 some odd titles, but they're natively downloaded to the hard drive. You know what I mean? Like, they're not streamed. Xbox Game Pass is 100 plus games that, are stored locally to the hard drive, and that's just what it is. It's like EA Access. Now, EA Access makes sense on multiple platforms because they're available everywhere, but Xbox Game Pass is like, how do you really offer that on other... You can't really offer that on mobile, first and foremost. It would just be the branding more than anything else. To say, Xbox Game Pass is available on, unless you're streaming it, right? And then that inherently changes everything about what Game Pass is. Is this xCloud at that point? Like, what are they doing? But I think the thing that's really polarizing about what Microsoft's been talking about lately is some of the inaccuracies in, their overall strategy. Now, we know that they're trying to put games on pretty much everywhere, right? We know they're doing xCloud, we know they're doing Game Pass, but they're kind of all over the map. So they've recently said, we don't want to have our first-party games on other platforms once they've wrapped up their current commitments, which is they've acquired all these recent developers that have already been doing PS4 and Nintendo Switch games, right? And so once those titles are wrapped up, they're going to go straight to Microsoft first-party. But now you're saying you want to put Game Pass everywhere, which includes Microsoft exclusives. Now, it's not totally recent games, but, it's got a lot of third-party stuff in there. So it's just like the branding doesn't really add up. But how do you offer that on PlayStation? They're PS4 games at that point. It heavily depends on third parties and if they want to be available on Xbox Game Pass on another service. And obviously, Sony's not going to agree to this whatsoever because it makes no gosh darn sense. There's the compatibility of it would be just so off. You can't move the 100 plus Xbox Game Pass games that are currently available on X1 and move them to mobile, move them to PlayStation, and make them available there. Again, is this meshing with xCloud? Are you at some point going to merge the two services together? Because it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now. It's just weird, really weird, right? To sometimes hear them say that they want to, stop their exclusives going to other platforms, and then you've got the flip side of it saying, well, we want to have our services everywhere. We want to offer streaming the games everywhere. We want to turn your Xbox One into a server. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I've really actually been enjoying what they've been doing lately. It's a lot of really consumer-friendly things. They care more about the software sales because they know that they've kind of gotten their face kicked in with hardware, and so they're really kind of branching out and just making their place in not just Xbox hardware, but as a service, and that's fine. That's their strategy, right? That's how they're seeing it. That's how they're seeing games moving forward. Sony's low-key doing the same thing, although not to the extreme that Microsoft's doing it. I just think that Microsoft right now really needs to get their messaging fixed. Even though that's a very broad statement, right? Like, if you really analyze that quote, it's super vague. He's just saying that they like games their service everywhere. Ideally, no plans, but that's, you know what I mean? So we can't really dissect it that much, but still a really weird comment to say, I find. And I hope there's a more direct path for them moving forward, especially when we get into next-gen hardware, which is still going to be very important for them. Now let's get into Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you could win a $10 PSN code, and I'd like to congratulate William Esterland. You have won a $10 code. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is very simple. Follow the link down below to the Gleam website, supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry. The winner will be announced next week. We do this every single episode of Let's Talk PlayStation, every Friday. I'm trying to pay for your games. Those are all the news stories I want to talk about with you guys from this past week. So on Monday, we didn't have a Wednesday video, but on Monday, I showed you every PlayStation controller in Sony's lineup from PS1 all the way to PS4. And miraculously, I knew that there was going to be one or two really slight revisions that I may have missed, which it looks like I did. Thank you guys for letting me know. Honestly, it was a good thing because I want to do that video now. In case I did miss something, I would surely be told, because this is YouTube and it's the internet, people. You know, somebody will point out something. Good, now I know that, and then we can do an update a year later when we have DualShock 5s. So, but if you want to see a pretty much 98% complete comprehensive history of Sony's controllers with their mainline PlayStation consoles, go watch that video. Most of you have already seen it, but thank you so much for the overwhelming support. I'm glad you guys really enjoyed it. Upcoming Tuesday video. So we're going back down to one for now. The next documentary is well underway, and so we're in a situation where I don't know if it will be ready by this Tuesday. So I'm not even going to mention what it is because I just don't know if it's going to be ready. If it's not ready this Tuesday, it will absolutely be done the following Tuesday. So you may get something else, but you may get that documentary. As always, follow on Twitter at Mystic Ryan. That's where I'm going to give you guys updates on not only what it is or if it won't make it, but stay tuned for that if you want to, you know, keep up to date with what's going on with that. But it's great because, you know, I've done 5 of them so far, and, you know, they're always so long. They take a lot of research and time, but I'm always learning, you know, certain methods and tricks and different sort of, you know, editing techniques to present it in a different way. So this one, I'm really enjoying how it's coming together. I think you all are really going to enjoy it, especially if you are a PlayStation fan. You're going to want to see, this topic. It's fascinating for sure, and I love doing these things, man, because I love the research, I love the learning, and I love cataloging it. And this is something that definitely a lot of people have not really covered all that well. So stay tuned, as always. Otherwise, though, that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Badecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.